So I am here right now in the land of anime waifus because I went to Tokyo Indie Game Summit. We did a really cool video together with Dude, the developer of Minami Lane, talking about small games. If you haven't checked it out, it's really nice. And I like going to these game development conferences. That's also, I think I'm one of the only game dev YouTubers, not to glaze myself, who does go to a bunch of them and tries to make content about it. Because I think they offer a unique view in just the game development scene that kind of sometimes we're in a soapbox, you and me, because the average Bite Me Games viewer and the average, devlog YouTuber or other game dev YouTuber viewer is kind of a different breed of game developer than the people who show up to those events. There is definitely a more hard commitment, I guess you could say, from the people who go to those events to set up a booth there for 2 days, and they want to take this seriously. They take game development way more seriously at the end of the day than just someone who is spending 2-3 hours a week like learning Godot on the side as a side project, which is more of the Bite Me Games viewer. I know there's some of you who are very big and successful game developers as well out there, but I think you are a minority. Whereas if you go to one of those conferences, everyone in there basically has skin in the game. Like, even some are hobbyists, but they're still hobbyists who want to get a return on investment, who want to take game development more serious if you're exhibiting there. And I think it's so interesting to talk to these people because this is something that maybe we don't talk about a lot. There is a very big imbalance between the studios there. So I had the video with Minami Lane. Beautiful guy, Dorian. I love him. But at the end of the day, we have to be honest. He just did a daily deal, I think a few weeks ago for Minami Lane on the Steam store page. And he's a really chill guy. And I think we looked very equal when we did that video there. But he made more money from that daily deal, in just 2 days basically, than we did in the last 3 years of running our studio. And you have this, like I said, imbalance where you have some of the game developers on these events that have had successful game releases already. Or for example, there were the developers of Kyoryu, which has hundreds of thousands of wishes, and they kind of know if we ship this game right now, we're going to have generational, life-changing amount of money coming from it. And then you have the other people there, like the you and me's basically, who are struggling still to get the 7,000 wish lists and all of that. And I think this is such an interesting concept basically, where it is so, not egalitarian, but it's everyone is on the same level at these events. And everyone at the end of the day still has some same struggles, especially on these events, knowing that some of these people, this is their job and they can do this for the next 10 plus years because they've had their big break already, is so motivating for all of them because it makes game development more viable. Kind of to drop that name, the title of this video, is game dev really viable? Because we often doom post. We often talk about, oh yeah, you're not gonna make any money from your game or whatever, especially the first few games you're making, you're not going to be earning anything. And that kind of is a problem for me, because for me that is the goal here. I want this to be viable. So it's not an easy thing to just say, yeah, the games industry is fucked and everyone's being laid off, because there are still people who are at these events who are still getting that life-changing amount of money, who are actively right now releasing games that are super successful, those make or break, not lottery hits, because game development, it's not just luck, there's way more than luck that comes to mind, but it can feel like that, where you look at another game and it's oh, this is kind of similar to something I made a while back, and I had a total failure of a launch, and these guys clearly seem to be doing way better than us. And I think it can get some bitterness, some jealousy, and that's the thing, hand in the air, when I was talking about earlier. Maybe you think that I'm bitter for bringing up that thing of Minami Lane and how much they earn. I think not. I think that's what keeps me in this game as well, and I think that's what gets a lot of people in the game as well. You start with that Stardew Valley moment, but Stardew Valley is crazy amounts of money. But even just, being able to full-time work on your game is, for a lot of people, their dream goal. It kind of is for us as well. It got me thinking about what is the final end goal of Bite Me even. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, but it's basically an extended version of, I want to make games that I like, and I want to be able to support myself just making games. I don't need to get the generational wealth, but I would like to be very comfortable. It's great. And going to these events definitely makes you more invigorated. And that brings me to the flip side as well, because this was a video I'd scheduled a while before already of I want to talk about this, because I've talked to other game developers in our audience who go that more hardcore approach, where they spend more than a year, almost 2 years, going really hard on game development, doing everything in their powers that they can to ship games, to ship more games, to make good games, they do good playtesting and all of that. And then even then, it still doesn't really run out. And if you're someone like me who has been following them throughout the entire journey, that sucks to see just as much basically, because that that kills that hopium again of, hey, you see these people having the good success, and then you also see these people who seemingly do everything right and do get success. And I think even if we zoom out of just indie game development, everyone is just like, oh, start your own game studio. We've talked somewhat on this channel of like, hey, the regular hiring and whatever, it's completely fucked because so many layoffs for the past more than 2 years at this point. So many professionals who didn't do indie but like worked for other studios keep losing their jobs, and there's like no capital anymore in game development unless you make something with user-generated content. That's the buzzword of the year apparently. Then you can get investors. But then I also met some people at Tokyo Indie Game Summit who are investors who are like, yeah, we're starting a new publishing label because we believe right now that it's going to be much better. So we're going to throw a few $1 million at finding those more smaller scoped games that we can actually support. I think that's one thing, like small scope games definitely are going to be here for a while, and I think the definition of what an investor sees or a publisher sees a small scope game versus the Bite Me and Minami Lane approach for small scope game is still a bit different, but not like the 7-year long development cycle games. I think that's not coming in there, but there was this optimism still from the people who are more veteran in here, so because those people also walk around at these events. And where do I want to go with this video, I think, is the question, because I get this question a lot. Is game dev really viable? Should I do this? Yes or no? And we often make fun, or not make fun, but we quickly point out to the people like, hey, this guy sold his house to go and make his dream game. And it's like, that's not the move probably. But at some point, yeah, you can't just keep doing this only on the side, because there is a real cost associated with it as well. If you're doing this full-time, like what me and William are doing, we can spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week or something on our game. Whereas if you're doing this on the side, not full-time, and you have a wife, and you have a life, and you have kids and whatever, and a job, you can basically do a quarter, less than a quarter of that. It's like, yeah, I'm lucky if I get 1 to 2 hours of work done every night, and then in the weekends I just want to die or something. That's also not a approach you can do until the end of time, because guess what, life is going on as well, and at some point you'll find yourself old and gray, and that's also not the approach. And I think this all comes to say, is game dev viable? I think it is, with a few big caveats. I think the first caveat is that you need to find a way. This is ideal. I think what we did, and what you see some other developers on YouTube, I think for example Aramus does really well, and Thomas Stewart, is you go into this with a big bucket of money. I think that's honestly one of the better approaches, where, similar to me, you've had your regular job and you're kind of reaching a point where you're like, I don't like this anymore. Let me save up a bunch, and then let me give myself a runway, and that needs to be a long-ass runway. Most runways that I look at, that I had, that other developers have, it's like 2 years. Game development is not quick money. I'm sorry to break that to you if you're new here. And then in that 2 years, basically release as many games as you can. And there's not like release as many games as you can of like, oh, I'm going to vibe code every day another like plane simulator or whatever, but more in the terms of, okay, making still quality indie games, but with that small scope mentality. If you spend 6 months on your first game, because everything's gonna go wrong, and then you can work that down to like 3 months, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, then it's just so much more worth it and viable, I would say, compared to the old school approach of, okay, going for demo, going for vertical slice, going for publisher funding and all of that. This is also something that I kind of got this sentiment shared with a lot of other game developers at the Game Summit, is like right now nobody believes in publishers. Like if you get a publisher, a lot of people aren't even actively looking for it anymore because they know that the return on investment probably isn't going to be there. I've had like developers making pretty solid games, speaking for more than a year to publishers only for them to get ghosted at the end, for the contract to be absolute dog shit and all of that, where most developers at this point, they don't really see publishing as something to do. They have realized as well, like, look, if we want to do this sustainable, we have to make ourselves sustainable quick. And the good thing is it's possible, it's doable, I think. And you know, there are some really good examples like the Sock Pop Collective that people point at of like, hey, we make all of these small games, like 1 to 4 month dev cycles, because it's 4 people and they release like 1 game every month that 1 person works on, and they build up that passive income. And that is right now, when I talk to these people, that is the vibe, that is the sentiment that I get from game development. The question is, how viable is this really? Like, how many people can actually do that and like have this big bucket of money, either as a solo developer or ideally as a group, and then just work on making games multiple years down the line and just hope it goes well? That's a really tough one. But I don't think it makes sense to be like all defeaters, because that's what I know you guys in our comments as well. Yeah, game development, you should only do it as a hobby. You're never gonna make any money. I think that's not true, because that's what these events show. That's what happens when you talk to these real game developers who have made it, who have maybe gotten dumb luck, who maybe just chose the right game at the right genre at the right time and spent time on marketing, making a marketable game instead of just a dream game. I think there are definitely sacrifices you have to make if you want to go for paying wages and having a salary and whatever. You can't just make whatever weird walking simulator. And I think it is still viable then. I think that is also what we are doing now, because it's been 3 years for us that we have been doing Bite Me games. And we haven't been full-time all 3 years, but it's been over 3 years since we started development on our first game. And I feel like an old man. I feel like I've aged like 15 years or something in that time. But I think right now also I am the most confident that I've ever been that this is actually viable for us. Like, not viable in general, but like looking back and looking at the future, I don't fear Bite Me Games is going to suddenly miserably collapse. Unless like Thomas or William or someone gets hit by a bus, I think then we do have a problem. But I think at this point, we're getting those multiple releases out there. We're getting more of that flow. And it took us 3 years basically to get here. We could have probably shrunk it down. Like the first 1.5 years, we were all doing this part-time, and you lose so much time and effort on it. I think, yeah, it still takes a fuck ton amount of time to make games. But I think the more you get that snowball rolling of making games and releasing more games, the more viable it gets, where even now we have 3 games out. And it's not massive earnings, but still to this day, we are grossing between $50 and $80 a day on Steam, which isn't crazy, but it goes up sometimes. If we get covered by a YouTuber or whatever, or we release a new game, it definitely does still spike to a few $100 a day. And then if you keep in mind even the 30%, it's still a decent amount of money. And yeah, you're not going to live in Germany or the Bay Area or something with that money. But if you're smart about it, if you keep your costs kind of limited and you just reinvest it into making more games for a while, it's almost a guarantee, because Forge Industry, a game released almost 2 years ago at this point, that honestly isn't even that amazing, still sells. Does it sell a lot? No. But it still sells and it still stacks up. And I think that is something I realized as well that is so powerful for game developers, is that long tail. It's something we don't talk about enough, because a lot of these 60 videos is like, oh, we made a game in 1 month, here's how much it earned. And I think back then, Unicycle Pizza Time made like $6,000 or something. We made that video 3 or 4 weeks after launch. Now we're at like $16,000 or something without having to touch it really. And I think that long tail is what makes game development so beautiful and so viable, and something that you can consider. The problem is just that most people, most studios, will never be able to go and reach that long tail point, either because they have to get money now, they have like a 6-month time period, in which case you're fucked, I'm sorry, or they put all their eggs into one basket. But I think the risk is so much higher then, where you only have one game, and then yeah, you have maybe a bit higher peak at launch, but it will slow down maybe again, and it's more risky because you only have one game then, and if it's your first game, it's probably gonna be bad. This is kind of a plug, this is kind of a story as well of like one of the things that I offer through our Patreon, which is filled with amazing content, honestly, if you want to go like a bit more deeper into the entire studio and business management aspect, and we talk about all of our finances on there super in depth, is I had someone who got like the coaching call tier, and we had a call, and he was like, yeah, I have these employees, I'm making a Suica game right now. You probably, if you're watching this, I still love you. What do I do? Because I have a runway of like 3 months, and it's hard for me to tell him that as well, but it's like, there's not much you can do, because 3 months is not enough time to suddenly save your company. You need, like, you can do Hail Marys, but those Hail Marys are just that, Hail Marys. It's not a way to actually like sustain your studio. A lot of studios I noticed are built on hope. They're like, I just hope my next game performs well. And this is not an ideal approach either, because most of the time hope shouldn't be your strategy. You can hope that a game performs well, but you can influence that hope and that luck factor kind of by focusing on what genre should I make, what art style should I do. And I know this is something that a lot of our audience once again absolutely hates, because you're our audience, you're not game developers going into this with a more full-time approach, I guess, where, you know, you have those people dependent on you. The guy with the Suica game, he had multiple people he had to pay paychecks for. He had to make sure that they can eat at the end of the day. And that is something that takes a lot of toll as well. And at some points, things have to give. And if you do have that desire to make games, I think you can make games and make it viable, But you can't just one day to the next decide, I've had enough of my job, I'm gonna quit it now and I'm gonna start making games. It's something that needs a lot of planning. It's something that you need to get started with whilst you still have some stability, whether it's a job or whether you're still studying. I think that's another thing. Like, we were very lucky with Thomas, for example. He's been making games for more than 10 years, and sure, they were very shitty, but he did it while he was a student. He did it while he didn't have that many responsibilities. Yes, it's a big difference for us as well now. I don't have kids. I don't have a wife. I live on my own. So if I can eat beans and toast for a year, if that means that we have more runway to make this work out, to make this viable, I think that is absolutely worth it. All of this to say, is gamedev viable? I think so. At the end of the day, Steam keeps growing. And we've talked about this before, like, yeah, there's more and more games coming out, but so many of those games are just miserable and no one will ever buy them. Have a higher standard for yourself and know that this is not a quick buck. This is not, oh, I'm using Cursor or whatever to make an AI SaaS application in a weekend and then I'm gonna sell that for $1 million. No, I keep telling that. Instead, this is something that if you do plan, to a certain degree, like you have the plan of, I'm gonna release a bunch of games. You don't need to plan, oh, I'm gonna make all of these games, because you don't know that yet. I think game dev is viable. And look, I know someone is probably commenting, it's like, yeah, but you're biased, because if you're gonna say, Marnix, that game dev isn't viable, then what's the point of this YouTube channel? What's the point of all of this? So keep that in mind, I guess, that, yeah, maybe I do have a bias to wanting to lie to myself that game dev is viable. But I do think, at the end of the day, if we step out of the echo chamber of /r/gamedev and all of that and the YouTube comments sometimes, and you talk to these people who have their hopes, their dreams and passions, who go to these events like Tokyo Indie Game Summit, who go to events like Gamescom or whatever, to show their game to the rest of the world, they have a passion, and I think, honestly speaking to them, a lot of them, they can make it work. And a lot of them have unique ways of making it work, but they make it work anyway along the end. I think the fact that publishers aren't a thing anymore has kind of freed them up, basically, because they're not worried about that anymore. They're just focusing on making good games, because at the end of the day, making good games and then making marketable games, making games that people want to play, is a better strategy, and sometimes even a more fair strategy, where you don't get like a shitty contract for a publisher to actually make this sustainable. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting. As you can hear, I'm also kind of sick, so this is a video. I don't know how structured, cohesive it is. I'm curious about your thoughts. Mike, one question, if you want to leave your thoughts down below, is do not just post, oh, anyone who wants to make silly games as a real job is dumb. That's not valuable, that's not constructive. That's the one thing I ask you. Do discuss it, but wait like 3 seconds before pressing that send button, because my god, sometimes you do have some brain dead takes. So thank you very much for watching. If you're new here, we upload 2 videos every week talking about game development, the things that I'm learning as we make our own games and all of that. And I just want to share those things with you to give you a real view of how this game development, running an indie studio and all of that works. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!